It's my journey, it's your journey. You need my help and I need yours. 'Cause we are...
Hello, family. Welcome to Journeys of Faith Super Saints podcast. Brother Joseph Freyaudenhoven here. Be sure to look at the description for special information of interest to you. Pope Pius X, a beacon of faith and simplicity. Hey there, friends, on this shared journey of faith. Let's take a moment to step back from the chaos of our daily grind and reflect on a figure who, in his own way, reshaped the heart of the Catholic Church with a quiet, unassuming strength. I'm talking about Pope Pius X, a man whose life and legacy still resonate deeply with anyone seeking to root their faith in simplicity and trust in God. Here at Journeys of Faith Ministry, we're all about finding those touchstones, those saints and stories that remind us to surrender to God's will, even when the world feels heavy. And Pius X, he's one of those guiding lights. Born Giuseppe Melchiorre Sarto in 1835 in a small Italian village, Pius X didn't come from wealth or power. He was a son of humble roots, a pastor at heart who rose to the papacy in 1903 almost reluctantly. But what he lacked in worldly ambition, he made up for in a fierce devotion to the spiritual well-being of the faithful. His motto, to renew all things in Christ, wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a mission. He believed in bringing the church back to its core, stripping away complexity to focus on what truly matters, a direct personal connection with God. For us at Journeys of Faith Ministry, that's a reminder of our own calling to provide simple, powerful spiritual resources that help you deepen your trust in God no matter where you are on your path. As we dive into the life of Pope Pius X, I invite you to see him not just as a historical figure, but as a companion in faith. His story is one of compassion, reform, and an unshakable belief in the power of prayer and the Eucharist to heal and transform. Whether you're a lifelong Catholic or someone just seeking a flicker of hope in uncertain times, there's something in his example for all of us. So let's walk this journey together, drawing inspiration from Pius X to foster that same simplicity and trust in our own lives. Stick with us as we explore how his legacy can still guide us today, and maybe even consider joining our community at Journeys of Faith Ministry to share in prayer and support as we grow in faith together. Early life and humble roots. Let's step back to the very beginning, to a small, unassuming village in northern Italy called Risi, where Giuseppe Melchiorre Sarto, later known as Pope Pius X, was born on June 2nd, 1835. Picture this: a tight-knit family of 10 children scraping by in a modest home, with Giuseppe's father working as a postman and his mother taking on sewing to keep food on the table. It wasn't a life of privilege or grand destiny, at least not on the surface, but there's something deeply human, almost grounding, about knowing that one of the church's most transformative popes started out as just another kid in a crowded, hard-working household. Young Giuseppe didn't grow up with visions of the papacy dancing in his head. Instead, he walked barefoot to school 4 miles each way because his family couldn't afford shoes. Think about that for a second. Those callous feet trudging through the dirt weren't just a quirk of poverty. They were a quiet testament to his grit. He had a sharp mind, though, and a heart already tuned to something bigger. His local priest saw it early, encouraging him to pursue studies despite the family's thin resources. Giuseppe's faith wasn't some abstract concept. It was a lifeline, a steady flame in the midst of struggle. By the time he entered the seminary in Padua at 15, thanks to a hard-won scholarship, you could already see the shape of the man he'd become. He wasn't chasing glory, he was chasing God. His classmates remembered him as serious but kind, the kind of guy who'd share his meager lunch with someone hungrier. These weren't just quaint childhood stories. They were the roots of a shepherd who'd later fight tooth and nail for the everyday faithful. In a world that often feels polished and distant, there's something raw and real about a future pope who knew what it meant to go without, who carried the weight of humble beginnings into every decision he'd make. Join us on a journey of faith. Hey there, fellow seekers of the divine. At Journeys of Faith Ministry, we're not just about reading inspiring stories like that of Pope Pius X. We're about living them. We know the road of faith can be rocky, filled with doubts and detours, but you don't have to walk it alone. We're here to offer a hand, a prayer, and a community that gets it. Let's dive deeper into God's will together, finding the kind of trust and transformation that changes everything. Here's how you can take the next step with us. Explore the surrender. Novena, start a simple, powerful devotional practice to let go and let God guide your path. Join the Divine Intimacy Guild. Connect with a community of believers who are hungry for spiritual growth and fellowship. Dive into our gospel reflections. Get regular doses of inspiration and practical wisdom straight to your inbox. Support our mission. Help us spread hope and healing by contributing to our ministry's growth. Whether you're wrestling with uncertainty or craving a deeper connection, we've got resources and a family waiting for you. Visit our website today and let's journey toward healing and hope together. Growing in priesthood, parish to patriarch. Let's take a moment to zoom in on the journey of Giuseppe Sardo, the man who would become Pope Pius X, as he climbed the ecclesiastical ladder with a quiet, unassuming grit that's almost cinematic in its understated power. Born into humble roots in Rice, Italy in 1835, Sarto didn't start with grand ambitions of papal tiaras or Vatican corridors. No, his early days were grounded in the earthy struggles of parish life. Think late night confessions, muddy boots from visiting the sick, and the kind of bone deep exhaustion that comes from shepherding a flock through life's inevitable storms. As a young priest, he wasn't dreaming of glory. He was too busy rolling up his sleeves, teaching catechism to kids, and making sure the poorest in his community had a hot meal. But here's where the story pivots. Sardo's knack for connecting with people, for seeing their raw, unspoken needs, didn't go unnoticed. By the time he was appointed Bishop of Mantua in 1884, he had already earned a reputation as a pastor who'd rather sit with a grieving family than polish a sermon for applause. He tackled diocesan debt and revitalized seminaries with the same practical zeal he'd shown in the parish, proving he could scale his heart for service without losing the personal touch. When he became Patriarch of Venice in 1893, it wasn't just a promotion, it was a testament to a man who'd built trust brick by brick, from the cobblestone streets of small towns to the grand canals of a historic city. What's inspiring here is how Sarto, even as his responsibilities grew, never lost sight of the little things. He'd still stop to chat with street vendors, still write letters of encouragement to struggling priests under his care. His ascent wasn't about ambition, it was about answering a call over and over with a fidelity that feels almost radical in its simplicity. For anyone wrestling with their own sense of purpose, there's a quiet lesson in his story. Greatness often starts with showing up day after day for the people right in front of you. The 1903 conclave and election. Picture the scene, the Vatican, 1903, a city within a city, buzzing with the weight of history and the murmur of prayers. The Catholic Church stands at a crossroads after the passing of Pope Leo XIII, a pontiff whose long reign shaped an era. Now the cardinals gather in the Sistine Chapel, their crimson robes a stark contrast to the solemnity of the moment, tasked with choosing the next shepherd of a global flock. It's a process steeped in mystery, tradition, and, let's be honest, a touch of political maneuvering. And in the middle of this sacred drama, a relatively unassuming figure, Giuseppe Melchiorre Sarto, emerges from the shadows. Sarto, then the Patriarch of Venice, wasn't the obvious choice. He didn't carry the flash of a Roman insider or the pedigree of a diplomatic heavyweight, but what he did have was a reputation for humility, a pastor's heart, and a deep, unyielding devotion to the Church's core mission. The conclave, which began on July 31st, 1903, was a tense affair with factions pulling in different directions. Some cardinals favored a continuation of Leo XIII's progressive policies. Others wanted a return to a more conservative stance. Sardo, though, seemed to float above the fray, a man whose simplicity and piety spoke louder than any political agenda. As the ballots were cast and counted under Michelangelo's towering frescoes, whispers began to circulate. Sarto's name kept rising, vote after vote. By August 4th, after several rounds, the tally was clear. Giuseppe Sarto would become Pope Pius X. When the white smoke billowed from the chimney, signaling a new pope to the world, the crowd in St. Peter's Square erupted. But inside, Sarto himself was said to have wept. Overwhelmed by the burden now placed on his shoulders, he chose the name Pius, inspired by the popes who had suffered for the faith, a nod to his own sense of duty and sacrifice. This wasn't just an election, it was a turning point. Pius X stepped into the papacy at a time when the church faced modern challenges, secularism, political upheaval, and internal debates over doctrine. Yet, here was a man who, at his core, believed in returning to the basics, faith, prayer, and the sacraments. His election felt like a quiet rebellion against the complexities of the age, a call to remember what truly mattered, to restore all things in Christ's papal vision. Let's dive into the heart of Pope Pius X's mission, a vision so bold it feels like a spiritual call to arms. Born Giuseppe Melchiorre Sarto, this humble man from a small Italian village rose to the papacy in 1903 with a motto that still echoes through the corridors of Catholic history: Instaurar omnia in Christo, to restore all things in Christ. It wasn't just a catchy phrase, it was a blueprint for a world he saw slipping away from its spiritual moorings. Pius X gazed out at a Europe gripped by secularism, materialism, and the creeping shadow of modernism, and he said, with the quiet ferocity of a shepherd guarding his flock, "Not on my watch." His papal vision wasn't about grand gestures or political maneuvering, it was deeply, almost stubbornly, personal. He believed the church needed to return to its roots, to the simple, unshakable truths of faith. One of his most radical moves? Lowering the age for First Communion to 7, insisting that even children could and should encounter Christ in the Eucharist. Imagine the audacity. In an era when sacraments were often delayed until adolescence, Pius X argued that grace doesn't wait for maturity. He wanted every soul, young or old, to know the intimacy of Christ's presence as early as possible. And then there was his battle against modernism, a term he wielded like a sword against ideas he saw as diluting the purity of doctrine. In his 1907 encyclical Pascendi Dominici Gregis, he didn't just critique, he dissected the intellectual trends of his day, warning that they risked turning faith into a subjective, ever-shifting opinion rather than a divine truth. Some called him rigid, a relic clinging to tradition, but there's a warmth in his resolve, a fatherly concern that the faithful not lose their anchor in a storm of newfangled ideas. Pius X's vision was a reminder that renewal starts small, in the quiet of a child's first prayer, in the daily bread of the Eucharist, in the unyielding defense of what's sacred. He wasn't just a pope, he was a pastor with dirt under his nails, tending to a flock he feared was wandering too far from home. The Pope of the Eucharist, encouraging frequent communion. Let's dive into one of the most heartfelt aspects of Pope Pius X's legacy, his deep, almost revolutionary love for the Eucharist. Known as the Pope of the Eucharist, Pius X didn't just admire this sacrament from a distance. He wanted every believer, young and old, to experience its transformative power as often as possible. In a time when frequent communion wasn't the norm, when many felt unworthy or reserved the sacrament for rare, solemn occasions, Pius X threw open the doors of grace with a warmth that felt like a personal invitation. In 1910, through his decree Quam Singulare, he lowered the age for First Communion, urging children as young as 7 to partake in the Eucharist if they could grasp its significance. Imagine the ripple effect. Kids, barely out of their early years, being welcomed to the table of Christ. It wasn't just about logistics or rules. It was a radical statement of inclusion, a reminder that Jesus calls everyone, no matter their age or station, to be nourished by his presence. Pius X believed that early and frequent communion wasn't just a privilege, it was a lifeline, a way to root young hearts in faith before the storms of life could pull them away. But he didn't stop with children. Pius X encouraged all the faithful to receive communion regularly, even daily if possible, as long as they were in a state of grace. This was a seismic shift. He saw the Eucharist not as a distant reward for the perfect, but as daily bread for the struggling, the weary, the searching. His writings and teachings radiate this tender urgency. Come to Christ, come often, and let him sustain you. It's as if he was sitting across from you, looking you in the eye, saying, don't wait to feel worthy. Let the Eucharist make you worthy. This wasn't abstract theology for Pius X, it was personal. He knew the world was messy, full of doubt and hardship, and he saw the Eucharist as the heartbeat of a faith that could carry you through. His encouragement wasn't a cold mandate, but a warm hand extended, urging every soul to draw closer to the source of all strength. Think about that for a second. How often do we hold back, feeling we're not ready for God's grace? Pius X's message cuts through that hesitation like a friend who knows you better than you know yourself. Liturgical renewal and sacred music. Let's dive into one of the most transformative aspects of Pope Pius X's papacy, his relentless push for liturgical renewal and the revival of sacred music. This wasn't just some dusty Vatican decree. It was a heartfelt mission to reconnect the faithful with the raw, transcendent beauty of worship. Pius X, often called the Pope of the Eucharist, saw the liturgy as the beating heart of Catholic life, a sacred space where ordinary folks could encounter the divine. But he wasn't blind to the reality on the ground. Masses had become rote, mechanical, and frankly uninspired in many places. He wanted to change that, and he didn't mince words about it. In 1903, he dropped a bombshell with his Motu Proprio tra le Sollecitudini, a document that wasn't just a set of rules but a passionate plea to restore sacred music to its rightful place in worship. He called out the creeping secularization of church music, operatic flourishes, and theatrical nonsense that distracted from prayer, and insisted on a return to Gregorian chant, the ancient soul-stirring melodies that had echoed through cathedrals for centuries. To Pius X, chant wasn't just tradition for tradition's sake, it was a vehicle for humility, a way to strip away ego and let the Spirit soar. He urged choirs and congregations alike to participate, not perform, emphasizing that the liturgy belongs to everyone, not just the trained elite. But this wasn't about nostalgia. Pius X was practical too. He knew not every parish had a choir of monks, so he encouraged simpler forms of sacred music alongside chant, as long as they carried that same reverence. He also pushed for Charles be faithful to receive communion more frequently during Mass, breaking down barriers that had kept many at arm's length from the Eucharist. This was revolutionary. Imagine the average Catholic of the time, often feeling unworthy or disconnected, suddenly invited to the table more often. It was a radical act of inclusion, wrapped in a warm, pastoral embrace. His reforms weren't without pushback. Some grumbled about losing the dramatic flair of modern compositions, while others dragged their feet on learning chant. Change is hard, especially in a church steeped in centuries of habit. Yet, Pius X stood firm, driven by a conviction that true worship could heal hearts and draw people closer to God. His vision was clear. The liturgy wasn't a show, it was a shared journey, a moment to pause the chaos of life and listen for the still small voice of the divine. Combating modernism with pastoral charity. Let's get real for a second. Pope Pius X didn't just sit in the Vatican issuing decrees like some distant, untouchable figure. He was a pastor at heart, a man who'd walked the dusty roads of rural parishes, who knew the smell of sheep on his hands. When he took on modernism, the creeping idea that faith could be watered down to fit the latest cultural trends, he didn't just swing a theological hammer. He did it with a kind of fierce, fatherly love that's hard to pin down but impossible to ignore. See, modernism wasn't just an abstract threat to Pius X. It was a wolf at the door, threatening the flock he'd sworn to protect. He saw it as a philosophy that risked diluting the truth of the gospel, swapping eternal teachings for fleeting intellectual fads. In 1907, he dropped Pascendi Dominici Gregis, an encyclical that wasn't just a warning but a battle cry. He called out modernism as a synthesis of all heresies, a sneaky erosion of doctrine that could leave believers unmoored. But here's the thing, he didn't stop at condemnation. Pius X paired his critique with a deep personal concern for souls. He urged bishops and priests to double down on teaching the catechism, to ground people in the basics of faith, because he believed that truth, delivered with charity, was the antidote to error. And let's not forget his push for the Eucharist. Pius X wasn't content to let communion be some rare ceremonial event. He lowered the age for First Communion, wanting kids as young as 7 to encounter Christ's real presence. Why? Because he knew that in a world spinning with new ideas and doubts, that intimate connection with Jesus was a lifeline. It wasn't just policy, it was personal. He wanted every believer, young or old, to have that anchor. This wasn't a cold academic fight for Pius X. It was a mission born from his years as a parish priest, from nights spent comforting the doubting and the broken. He fought modernism not to win arguments, but to save hearts, to keep the faithful close to the unchanging love of God. That's the kind of shepherd he was, tough when it mattered, but always, always with a hand outstretched. The Catechism of St. Pius X explained. Let's dive into one of the most enduring legacies of Pope Pius X, a work that feels like a quiet guiding hand in a world often loud with confusion. The Catechism of St. Pius X, published in 1908, isn't just a dusty relic of Catholic history. It's a living tool, a straightforward map for anyone yearning to understand the faith at its core. Pius X, often called the Pope of the Eucharist, had a heart for the everyday believer. He didn't craft this catechism for theologians in ivory towers, but for you and me, ordinary folks seeking answers to life's biggest questions. What makes this catechism so special? It's the simplicity. Pius X believed that the truths of the faith shouldn't be locked behind complex jargon. He wanted children, families, and even the busiest among us to grasp the essentials of what it means to be Catholic, broken into bite-sized questions and answers. It covers the basics: God, the creed, the sacraments, prayer, and moral life. Think of it as a spiritual FAQ born from a pastor's heart. He once said his mission was to renew all things in Christ, and this little book was his way of making sure no one got left behind on that journey. But don't let the simplicity fool you. There's depth here, a quiet power in how it distills centuries of teaching into something you can hold on to during a tough day. It's like sitting with a wise grandparent who knows exactly how to explain the mysteries of life without overwhelming you. Whether it's understanding why the Eucharist matters or how to live out the commandments, Pius X's catechism feels personal, almost like a conversation. It's a reminder that faith isn't just about rules, it's about a relationship, a tether to something eternal. And here's the thing, over a century later, it still resonates. In an age where we're bombarded with noise and distraction, this catechism cuts through with clarity. It's not about grand gestures, but small, steady steps toward God. If you've ever felt lost in your spiritual life or just curious about the foundations of the faith, this work is a gentle invitation to come back to the basics. It's Pius X whispering across time, encouraging us to keep asking, keep seeking, and keep trusting. Marian devotion and the surrender Novena connection. Let's dive into a facet of Pope Pius X's legacy that feels like a quiet, sacred thread weaving through the tapestry of Catholic devotion, his deep love for Mary, the Mother of God. Pius X wasn't just a pope of grand reforms, he was a man who knelt at the feet of Our Lady with the simplicity of a child, urging the faithful to do the same. His papacy amplified Marian devotion, emphasizing her role as a guide to Christ, and he often spoke of the rosary as a weapon of peace in a world teetering on the edge of chaos. This wasn't abstract theology for him. It was personal, raw, and real. Now connect that to something as intimate as the Surrender Novena, a prayer practice that's all about letting go and trusting God's will, no matter how heavy the burden. At first glance, it might seem like a leap, but stick with me. Marian devotion, as Pius X championed it, is surrender in its purest form. When we turn to Mary, we're not just asking for intercession, we're mirroring her ultimate yes to God at the Annunciation. She didn't just accept God's plan, she embraced it with a heart wide open, even when the path ahead was shadowed with suffering. The Surrender Novena channels that same spirit, asking us to release our grip on control and trust, just as Mary did. Pius X understood this connection intuitively. His encouragement of frequent communion and devotion to Mary wasn't about piling on rituals, it was about drawing us closer to a lived faith, one where surrender isn't a defeat but a victory of trust. Imagine praying the Surrender Novena while meditating on Mary's fiat, her total submission to God's will. It's like a spiritual double shot, a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles. Mary's example, amplified by Pius X's teachings, becomes a lantern in the dark, guiding us to lay down our fears at the foot of the cross. This intersection of Marian devotion and surrender isn't just historical trivia, it's a lifeline. In a world that often feels like it's spinning out of control, turning to Mary as Pius X did offers a kind of grounding. It's a call to pause, to breathe, to pray, and to trust that God's got this even when we can't see the way forward. Shepherding immigrants in the American church. Let's rewind to the early 20th century when the Catholic Church in America was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and struggles. Pope Pius X, often remembered for his deep piety, didn't shy away from the gritty reality of his flock. Across the Atlantic, he saw the waves of immigrants, Italians, Irish, Poles, and others pouring into the United States, often landing in cramped tenements with little more than their faith to hold on to. These weren't just numbers to him, they were souls, and he felt a fierce responsibility to shepherd them. Pius X pushed for the church to adapt, to meet these newcomers where they were. He supported the creation of national parishes, churches tailored to specific ethnic groups where they could hear the gospel in their own tongue and preserve their traditions. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about keeping the faith alive in a foreign land that could feel hostile. He knew that faith was often the only anchor these families had, and he wasn't about to let it slip through their fingers. But here's the flip side. Pius X also had a sharp eye on the broader American church, which was wrestling with its own growing pains. He worried about Americanism, a controversial idea at the time that suggested Catholic doctrine should bend to fit modern democratic ideals. Pius X wasn't having it. He believed the church's truth was timeless, not something to be reshaped by cultural trends. His 1899 letter to the American bishops, Testem Benevolentiae Nostrae, was a gentle but firm reminder to hold the line, to keep the faith pure even as they welcomed the new and the diverse. This balancing act, caring for the vulnerable while guarding tradition, shows the heart of Pius X. He wasn't just a distant figure in the Vatican, he was a pastor who ached for his people, whether they were singing hymns in Italian on the Lower East Side or debating theology in seminaries. His warmth came through in his insistence that the church be a home, a refuge, and a rock, no matter where you came from or what challenges you faced. A lasting legacy of faith with Pope Pius X. As we reflect on the life of Pope Pius X, we're reminded of a shepherd who walked humbly among his flock, guiding with a heart full of love and an unwavering commitment to the simplicity of faith. His call to return to the Eucharist and to nurture a childlike trust in God resonates even now in our often complicated, uncertain world. At Journeys of Faith Ministry, we see his legacy as an invitation, a nudge to lean into that same trust, to surrender our burdens, and to find solace in the sacraments. Pope Pius X knew that faith isn't just doctrine, it's a living, breathing connection to the divine. So let's take that to heart. Join us in prayer, perhaps through the Surrender Novena, and let's rediscover the peace that comes from handing it all over to God. Whether you're wrestling with doubt or seeking deeper devotion, our community is here for you with resources, reflections, and fellowship. Together, inspired by Pius X's example, We can cultivate a faith that heals and transforms. Step into this journey with us. Your next moment of grace might be just a prayer away. Thanks for listening to Super Saints Podcast. Be sure to click the link in the description for special news items.
It's your journey, but we won't make